Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Let's paint. Okay, so this is the next page of the Majestic Horses watercolor coloring book. As always, you always want to make sure you have your brush, some place to mix the paint palette. Any paint palette works. This is just the one that I like using, and I will leave details of everything in the description if you're interested in looking over any of the supplies. Cup of water on the side. I actually have 2 cups of water just because that way if one of them gets dirty, it's easier to just move on to the next one. Paper towel or a rag, something that you can dry off your brush with, and then just a scrap piece of paper. It doesn't have to be watercolor paper. You can just use a regular piece of paper. Sometimes it's just good to kind of get an idea of what the color that you're mixing looks like, and also just to take some paint off of the brush, practice some brush strokes. All that's good. Okay, so this one, the color palette for this image is going to be mainly kind of like a warm and cool, kind of like play between the two. And we are going to leave some things unpainted, but just follow me on this. I think you'll like how it turns out. So first we're going to use some brown. And if you don't have brown in your palette, it's pretty straightforward in mixing it. The way to do that is just get some, mix the 3 primary colors and then add a little more red and play around with the red and the yellow. You can kind of shift it till you get to a nice brown color. I am going to make an entire separate video on color theory and mixing colors, but for the sake of staying on point, we're just going to focus on this for now. And so with this brown, the way we'll do it is we're mixing a good amount of water with pigment, and we're going to start off by layering in. We're imagining that the light is coming from the top. Obviously this would have to be outside. I don't think you can do this activity in an inside environment. And what we'll do is kind of layer in where you think the darker spots would be, the ones that are in more shadow, less light. And after we lay those in, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just kind of blocking in the colors. We're just going to rinse our brush a little bit, get some water, and then pull out the rest of the color. And you see immediately how that creates kind of like the illusion of form. Since the parts on the bottom are darker, the ones on the top are much lighter. It just shows you where the light is coming from as you're painting it. And since we want to be a little more expressive with this one, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add some more brown, and then do maybe some splatters. We want you to show action. Splatters and just smearing color around definitely adds to the movement of an image. And you can see I'm not very picky about how it looks. I'm just kind of throwing it on there, making it look more dynamic. And we're going to leave that as it is. Next, let me see. I have 2 different blues. One of them is lighter and the other one's darker, or more intense, I should say. If you want to use the technical terms, they're phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. I generally don't care for technical terms. I mean, you can see what the colors are. Okay, so I'm going to use the lighter blue just because the other one is just really strong and it'll overpower the warm colors. Okay, and once I have a good mixture on the side, I'm going to basically do the same thing more to the front of where the girl is, kind of like her blazer here. I'm imagining that this part is much darker than the rest of the jacket, and also maybe the bottom part of her sleeves. Just create that kind of like illusion of depth and space by using the dark and the lights. I'm going to dry off my brush a little bit and then just pull out that color just like that. And that right there is exactly what I was going for. And I'm also going to just grab some of this blue and then just kind of add a lot of water, smear it around. I'm going to dry off my brush, then pick up some of that excess. Perfect. I know you might be thinking it looks kind of messy right now, but what we'll do is, as we're building up the values, it'll separate the objects more from the background brush marks that we made. So we can go back to the horse with the brown and do the same thing. This time we're going to emphasize a lot more the darker parts. So let's see, like here. The thing that you really have to keep in mind is that when you're watercolor painting, you're essentially staining the paper. But the thing about staining the paper is, as it dries, it lightens up. So even though it looks much darker now, the layer that we're putting on, it does look much darker. It will, once it's dry, it will look much lighter. So then we just have to do this a couple of times to kind of build up the values. That's what I mean from what I said earlier. And you can use the darker tones to just create, you know, some texture, maybe show off some of the shading of where like the musculature of the horse might be. And as I mentioned before, it's not a big deal if you go outside of the lines. That's par for the course for the nature of how watercolor behaves. Now, there are some artists that do a really good job of making everything look very, very tight and organized with watercolor. And you can do that. And I have done paintings on this channel before where I intentionally made that. Often that works for when you're painting flowers and plants in general, just because they can be very chaotic. Like I have one here on the side that I had painted a while ago. And you can see I tried doing a little more, like the background's chaotic, but on the detail on the flower I tried a little more, keeping it tight, less expressive, just because plants, by their nature, they look very chaotic, very complicated. But something like this, where you want to show the movement and the expression, the looseness of the watercolor works to your favor. And now on the side, I'm going to use the same two colors. So far we've only applied two colors onto the painting. I'm going to use the blue and the brown to mix a nice gray. And this gray, we're going to make sure that it's a little more on the blue side, because we're going to use it as the base color for her jeans. That way it doesn't look identical to anything else. Like you can see the differentiation. Okay. And same thing, I'm going to add more of the darker color towards the center, away from where the light would be hitting. And go slowly. There's no rush. There's no need to rush. I tend to rush a lot. Just because I'm so used to sketching quickly, like on the go or in public. And then I'm just going to pull off some of that color and give that nice gradation, some of that fading. I'm going to dry off my brush and pick up some of that. So you can see there's a clear, darker, and lighter portion of the jeans. And we will define that further by adding more detail to it later. But for right now, what we can do is, like, let's say, we'll go over here on the side and we'll add a little bit of the dark blue with the brown. And if you have a different palette, you can obviously just play around with the ratios of the colors that you're using to kind of manipulate the intensity. For this one, we're mixing the color for the mane and the tail of the horse. And you can see that if you put more pigment, less water, it definitely makes it come out much darker. And by playing around with the two colors, like going back and forth and not adding additional water, it makes it just look a lot darker. So, like, for example, if I take this color that we just mixed and we lay it down next to the color that we used for the jeans, obviously it's a little more on the blue side, but there is a significant difference in the value. Granted, if you remember what we said earlier, is that it will look lighter once it dries. So we're just going to go ahead and fill in the mane. And then we're just doing a flat wash. Like with this, what we're avoiding to do any textures or shading. Is just filling in or blocking in the color where we want it. Part of that is because this part in particular is much darker. It's not like the body where we had to layer in some lighter and then some darker. Because when something's really dark, like hair, you only want to show maybe like highlights. But in this case, we're not too worried about that. Especially because it's so much smaller. Usually things like this that are smaller, you don't want to worry about showing off the detail when they're further away. You can kind of drive yourself crazy doing that and trying to like get it perfect. It'll just distract you from the rest of the composition. This bar that the horse is jumping over, we're intentionally going to leave it blank. I mean, you can still see what it is because of the drawing, but if you try to color it in, it'll actually throw off the balance of the painting. If you want to, feel free to give it a try, but you'll see that it won't look as good as just keeping it as it is. So next, we're going to once again layer in some of the color. Oh, see, some of my colors are mixing here without me wanting them to. So I'll grab my rag and just kind of create a separation here, and we're good to go. I'm going to grab more of the brown color, and it's more pigment, less water. That way I can continue to layer in the shadows and really bring out the intensity. So same thing, we're just going to go over. You'll probably notice I'm painting right over a lot of the details of the harness and the lead. So that's okay, because those will actually be black. We'll use a synthetic black to outline those details, so we don't have to worry about them right now, because if we paint right over them, we'll still be able to show them when we use like a really intense synthetic black. We're really aiming to build up those dark colors. And what ends up happening is as you're building up the darker shaded parts, you actually also create more intensity in the lights. You make them pop more. And I'm just kind of outlining some of the parts that I think look like they should be darker. You can see that I'm not repeating over everything completely. Maybe I'm doing some outlines here and there, like maybe under here to show the shadow underneath the strap of the saddle that goes around the horse. And you can always just step back for a moment. Like I'm gonna step back right now just to take a look at it. And I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing is we want to grab the color that we had mixed up for the jeans. We're not really adding anything to it. We're using the exact same color. We're just layering in the same place where we did before, just to show the darker part of the jeans. And we can rinse off our brush, dry it off, and then kind of muddle the edges so that we're not taking away of that smooth transition in the gradient here. And while that's drying, I was going to start working on the saddle or the boot, but I'm just going to avoid that for now because I want to let that dry. I don't want to worry about accidentally spilling over into it. And I'm just going to add some water to this, the mixture that we used for the mane and the tail, and I'm actually just going to fill in the hooves, and I'll fill them in completely. And again, in this case, I'm using a flat wash, which is just blocking in the color. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm just laying down where I want that color to be and letting it dry. The next thing that we can do is we'll grab some more of the blue that we used for the blazer here, for the rider. And I'm using a lot less water than I did previously so that I can further emphasize the shadows and just lay that in. And do some outline. This time I'm not going to fuzzy up the edges just because I want that sharp detail to show. I think that's perfect. Okay, now we can go ahead and focus on painting in the straps and the harness and everything in the saddle. We'll do that in two parts. One of them will be just kind of the pure synthetic black, just to show the outline and the details of the different straps that are running around. And then the saddle itself will be more of a desaturated purple. Let's do it one at a time. So first I'm just going to get the black that I'm going to lay down for the outlines of the straps. Okay, like we're gonna follow all of this just carefully. Take your time. And use the tip of the brush if you want to get the really nice, fine, detailed lines. What I mean before we continue is, like, I'll give you an example. If I get a bunch of black here and I use the side of the brush, you see you're making a really wide mark. But if I just use the tip of the brush, I can make really fine outlines. This is how a lot of people will do calligraphy, as they're writing. That's basically what you're focusing is you just want to do the details. And when you do that, when you're using just the very fine tip of the brush, you can't really rush it unless you're trying to create like some quick marks or like some textured effect. So you do want to take your time and don't rush. If you make a mistake, don't sweat it. Don't try to overwork it. Often if I make a mistake, I just let it be, because with watercolor, if you try to overwork it or add more detail, it usually just ends up making it worse. And there have been plenty of paintings where I've made a mistake and I just left it, and then people don't even know that it's there until I point it out. Okay. Especially if the overall piece looks good, one little mistake doesn't really take away much from it. Okay. This is coming along pretty nicely. The next thing we'll do is we'll mix up, I'm just going to grab some purple. What you can do is, like, for example, if you just take some blue and red, same thing, you can mix up purple. So this is the color that I'm going to use for the saddle. And we'll do the same thing that we did for the shading of the horse and the jeans and the jacket here. We'll do is the darker color, we'll go ahead and we'll lay that in. Like that. We'll continue that back here by just doing a little bit and then rinsing off my brush. And I still have a little bit of moisture in the brush. I'm just going to pull that out. I'm going to pull that out so we can create that fading. I'm going to dry off my brush and maybe take off some of it, lighten it up. The only time you can lighten up a color you've already laid down is while it's still wet and you pick it up with a semi-dry brush. So you can see how it's darker here, a little bit lighter here. So far, so good. The next thing is we need to, well, I was going to say let's paint the boot here, but we don't want to do that while this is still drying. So next we'll focus on the skin tone. I know one of the previous videos I talked about mixing skin tones pretty quickly. It is something that I'll cover a lot more in depth further on, because it is a complex topic. Often what I do is I just cheat a little and use already pre-mixed skin tone. But since this isn't a very common color, it's normally never put into palettes. I'll just show you how to mix the actual skin tone. So what you'll do is you'll grab some brown, not brown, red. Grab some red. Although you could use brown to start off with, it's just harder to get to the color you're looking for if you're mixing a light skin tone. Okay, and then we're going to mix in yellow. So right now I just have red and yellow, and obviously that's how you get orange. I'm going to pick up a lot of this and rinse off my brush and then just get water and then mix it in. Now obviously this looks way too orange, so I just need to grab a little bit of red and mix it in. We're looking more for like a peachy color. A little bit more like that. Maybe just a little bit. I often overdo it. It does take a little bit of kind of like playing around with it to get the right skin tone. Kind of have to go back and forth a good amount. And I often end up taking a lot of the pigment out and then just adding more water, just because it's not a very strong color. It's a very subtle color. And so this color, for example, if we lay it down on the paper, that looks very close to the skin tone that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill it in. The only thing that I'll try avoiding is her eyes, and the rest of the details I'm just going to paint right over them. just like that. That's a lot of color mixing for just such a small amount of detail. Okay. And we're going to let that dry. Also, remember, it will dry lighter. And then we can focus on the boot. And I'm going to switch out my colors, or my mixing plates. Okay, so for the boot, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab some brown and then mix it in with the gray that we had here. And that's it. And I'll go ahead and I'll lay that in. We still want it to be brown. We just want it to be kind of like desaturated. And rinse my brush. I'm going to pick up some of the color here just to show the lighter side. And then I'm going to let that dry. In the meantime, what I'll do is this color that we had mixed previously for the mane and the tail, I'm just going to grab a little bit of the dark blue, throw it in there to try to make it a little darker. And I'm also going to grab a little bit of red. What I'll do is make it more, push it more towards purple, but also it actually makes it darker. It makes it look darker. And that exact color is what we'll use to create some of the darker tones in the hair. Now I'm using the tip of the brush as we did earlier, and just kind of going in a little bit at the base of the mane, just to show that there is a difference, basically like a shadow. And same for the back here. Just going to do some small brush strokes like that. And finally in the hooves, I'm just going to do a little bit. I'm not going to fully fill them in. I just want to leave a little bit of a mark just to show that, give that feeling of two tones. But that looks good. The next thing to do is to the hair. We need to do the hair, and so you can honestly pick any color. You could do brown, black, yellow. I'm just gonna kind of do like a hazel, like maybe a little bit of brown with a little bit of orange, just to create a little more variation in the colors. So I'm just gonna grab some orange, okay, I'm gonna put some red, some yellow. I do have some orange ready to go, but sometimes I just like to experiment and play around with the colors and see how it comes out. And I think that's a good color. We'll go ahead and we'll throw that in here. Just like that. We're almost done. The only other thing that I really kind of noticed is we forgot to paint in this strap right here that she's using for her foot, and we can just go ahead and do that right now. Just solid black, fill that in. Rinse your brush. I'm going to step back and look at it for a moment. I think this all looks really good. There's one thing that kind of gets a little lost, and that's this area right here. That's because the saddle and the jeans, they're too close together in terms of saturation, but also of light and dark. So the way to fix that is we're going to make the saddle darker. And the way we'll do that is we'll grab some purple, maybe some blue to make it a dark purple. And notice I'm not using a lot of water, I'm using a little bit. That way we can get the intensity of the more dense pigment. And then I'll just go ahead and I'll put an outline here like that, and then add more like this. Not completely, but I still want some of the details to show through, but definitely right next to where the jeans are. I just wanted to kind of like separate the two from one another. Like that. And then maybe a little bit over here just to outline the saddle in the details. And rinse off my brush. Now I'm going to step back again. And I actually think this turned out really good. As always, if you want to, you could add further detail by either taking a pen or pencil, maybe doing some outlines. But I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Okay, so that's all for this one. As always, if you have questions, shoot me an email, leave me a message, comment, whatever works. And I will have every supply that I used in the description, going over different options for different tools. And hopefully all that made sense. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.